Welcome to this explainer. When we picture ancient Rome, our minds instantly jump to gleaming white marble columns, polished bronze armor, or maybe shimmering gold coins. But today, we're going to take a deep dive into something way more common but absolutely vital to the daily functioning of the empire.
So, let's jump right in. Ask yourself, what material was as versatile and ubiquitous to an ancient Roman citizen as plastic is to us today? What was the foundational material for their everyday household items, their tools, and their personal accessories?
Well, the surprising reality? It was humble animal bone and deer antler. Literally plucked right off the local butcher's block or just gathered up from the nearby forest. It wasn't glamorous, not by a long shot, but it was cheap, highly durable, and locally abundant. It was the absolute perfect synthetic-like material for the masses.
Section 1. The plastic of antiquity. Material properties and raw sources.
These ancient artisans were incredibly resourceful, you guys. They knew exactly how to match the physical properties of a material to its final function. Take cattle and horse bone, for instance. Gathered directly from local butchers, these long bones provided incredibly dense, thick shafts. That made them absolutely ideal for load-bearing items that really took a beating, stuff like box hinges, tool handles, and thick pins. On the flip side, red and roe deer antler, often just gathered from shed antlers in the woods, has this tough, fine-grained outer layer and a spongy core. It's naturally shock-absorbing. That offered the exact flexibility they needed for delicate things like comb plates and cosmetic spatulas that had to bend without snapping. Meanwhile, elephant ivory was a whole different ballgame. Imported at massive expense from Africa and India, it was this dense, super fine-grained luxury material, leaving it restricted almost exclusively to the elite for things like fine caskets and seals.
Section 2. Inside the Roman workshop. The gritty, messy reality of production.
Now, archaeological evidence really shatters our pristine, romanticized image of Roman life. Findings from major sites like Augusta Raurica reveal that these bone-working shops were definitely not immaculate artisan studios. They were incredibly messy, dusty street-front stalls or cramped back rooms. We know this for sure because we keep finding massive, concentrated pits of workshop waste, literally mountains of bone shavings, cut ribs, discarded joints, and drill cores.
Just imagine the sheer physical labor here. Moving from raw, bloody butcher's waste to a polished final product without any modern machinery required an immense amount of effort. First, artisans acquired the bone, scraped it clean, and likely boiled it. Then came the really heavy work, cleaving or sawing those dense long bones into workable blanks. Next, they rough-shaped the blanks using iron chisels and files. For the finer details, they hand-drilled holes and painstakingly scraped in grooves. If they were making something complex, like a multi-piece comb, they'd assemble the whole shebang using tiny copper alloy rivets. And finally, they achieved that smooth surface finish using raw pumice stone or sand cloth.
Section 3. Creating everyday artifacts. The tools of the trade and the objects they made.
So what did they use to make all this? Simple, but highly effective manual tools. They wielded fine bronze or iron bow saws to cut through tough antler burrs, and heavy axes and cleavers for that initial rough splitting. They used metal hand drills and awls for perforations, and rafts that literally leave parallel striation marks, marks we can actually still see under a microscope today. They'd finished the work with abrasive stones and leather burnishers. But listen closely to this part. There is absolutely zero secure archaeological evidence of rotational treadle lathes being used in this period. None. Everything was shaped, smoothed, and drilled purely by hand-powered motion.
This really highlights the massive economic divide of the ancient world. On one hand, you've got the highly curated luxury goods of the rich, imported elephant ivory mirror frames, walrus tusk amulets, and rare marine shell cameos. But on the other hand, you have the true engine of the Roman domestic economy, the everyday utility items. We're talking millions of locally sourced cattle bone hairpins, sewing needles, tunic toggles, and cubic gaming dice. These were the ubiquitous, essential items needed for daily grooming, textile work, and leisure by the average citizen.
Section 4. Who used these objects? Subverting demographic expectations.
Pop culture gets this wrong all the time. It's a super common assumption that Roman frontier forts, the very edge of the empire, were strictly male-only, heavily militarized zones filled exclusively with soldiers, weapons, and armor. But when archaeologists actually excavate frontier forts like Vindolanda in Britain, they don't just find swords and shield bosses. The archaeological reality is that these sites are absolutely packed with women's bone hairpins, family toiletry sets, and grooming tools used by both sexes. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that women and families were deeply integrated into these frontier military spaces.
The key to this demographic mix is something called a vicus. Basically, a vicus was a military-adjacent civilian settlement or artisan community. It wasn't just a temporary camp, it was a permanent, bustling hub deeply involved in local trade and family life. Local bone-working artisans would set up shop there, supplying the station soldiers with custom bone knife handles and gaming dice, while simultaneously supplying their families with everyday goods like sewing needles and decorative combs. It was a thriving, mixed demographic market.
Section 5. Fixing modern reconstructions. Busting the myths of Hollywood's Rome.
Okay, let's fix some pervasive errors you've probably seen in historical movies or even museum recreations. First off, people tend to treat all bone, antler, horn, and ivory as the exact same identical material, which we know isn't true. We also constantly depict freshly worked bone as immaculate, glowing, and perfectly white. We completely ignore the massive waste piles to show spotless workshop floors. We invent anachronistic, medieval-style treadle lathes for the 1st and 2nd century. We assume military forts had 0 women or children present. We automatically equate every pointed bone fragment to a deadly weapon's arrowhead, rather than a simple awl. And perhaps worst of all, we overuse rare African ivory in common, everyday provincial market stalls.
When we finally swap that Hollywood myth of pristine, glowing white ivory perfectly turned on a mechanical lathe for the gritty historical reality, everything changes. The reality is hand-drilled, creamy yellow and stained cattle bone, painstakingly shaped with a bronze saw by an artisan sitting in a messy, shavings-filled street stall. When you look at it that way, the ancient world suddenly feels so much more real, incredibly resourceful, and deeply human. They weren't making magical, flawless items in a dust-free guild. They were hard-working people using the literal waste of their food supply to build their lives.
So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. If humble, discarded animal bone was the highly adaptable, everyday plastic of the Roman Empire, as you look around at the actual synthetic plastic objects defining your daily life right now, how will they eventually tell our story to the archaeologists of the future? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.